emotional thought giving way to financial investment decisions.
That sounds really sweet. That sounds like a memorable thing to write in a book or something. That you meet in the war and then you eventually get married.
I bumped into
Through
her in,
bumped to her.
it was Christmas of 72, I guess. So I had already come back.
Oh, you'd come back.
Yeah, I
Oh,
was over
okay.
there tail end of 68, 69, and most of 70. And my romance with the other lady had perished by the wayside, and
Mhm.
there was not a lot of uh, potential life material in Camp Lejeune area, let us say. So it was pretty much a drought time for me.
So, is there any other experiences that we have not covered or questions that we have not covered that you would like to add to?
Dozens of them. How long you got? For instance, this trunk here. Before I went to Vietnam, I carved my name in it and my serial number in it. And I put all my worldly Marine Corps possessions in it in Okinawa, and they put it in a air-conditioned storage building. And I remember very distinctly when I retrieved this thing some 20 months plus later. And I remember when I put the trunk away, when I turned it over to the storage people, I said, I'll probably never see this. Either I'll get blown away or it'll get lost or a hurricane will take it out or something will happen. I had minimal confidence in getting it back, and it had some uniforms in there, and this was a big deal. I really hated to see it go because if I lost it, it would really be a serious kick in the teeth. When I retrieved it 20 odd months later, I remembered that experience, and I had both my feet, I had both my hands, I had my eyes, and I didn't care about the silly trunk. That was petty stuff. One of the transformations that did occur in the war, and indeed it was not a traumatic one-day experience, but there were things that happened over the experience that influenced my outlook on life, and the trunk here is an example of that. I have a better appreciation of what is important and a better appreciation of what is nice to have, but not critical to existence.
That sounds
There are other things that you experience. I remember early in the operation, before I'd even been assigned to a battalion, before I was working, we had a PX run. A bunch of guys had piled in the back of an old 6x truck and gone off to Freedom Hill, where they had a big PX, sort of like a target, if you will. And the array was not quite as wide, but it had most things that a Marine could possibly want. And I remember one of my squad leaders. Well, I'm sorry, he was a 81 millimeter forward observer. He had spent his entire 4 years in the Marine Corps out of boot camp, all in Vietnam. He was crazy, but a really cool guy. And he had bought a plastic sleeve which would hold a package of cigarettes. And he got the new one and put his cigarettes in it, and he took the old one and he was carving it with his knife and throwing the pieces out of the back of the truck. And understand this is an open truck, so we're just bouncing around on this thing. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm carving up this cigarette case into small pieces. I said, I can see what you're doing, Sergeant. Why are you doing it? He said, so the gooks can't use it. I said, Sergeant, enlighten me. What can a Vietnamese national, good guy or bad guy, do with a sleeve of a plastic cigarette holder? And he said, I don't know, but they ain't going to use this. And he continued tearing it up. I said, this guy's a nutcase, which I was correct in, by the way. Fast forward a year and a quarter. I'm sitting in a hooch in a battalion built-up area, and I'm going through junk and cleaning out the drawers before I depart so I can go to the air wing for my remaining 3 months in country. I have a pile of ballpoint pins that have long since succumbed to the weather of Vietnam. The ink was solidified and there was no ink coming out of any of these pins. They were about 110% useless. And I was unscrewing them, and I was taking the central ink cartridge and breaking it in two. And I was taking the little spring that's part of the ballpoint pen and stretching it so that it was useless as a spring. Halfway through this process, I said, what am I doing? And I remembered this experience that had occurred more than a year before, where the guy was carving up his plastic container. And I said to myself, this is nuts. Why am I doing this? And I said to myself, I answered myself, so the gooks can't use it. And I continued my process. Suddenly it did not seem nearly so strange as it had a year before.
Wow. That's something to actually, that's a nice memory to look back to.
No, it shows I'm crazy. But it is nonetheless one of the little vivid points that stick with me that are very, very strong, and I think there's a lesson there if you overturn enough rocks and see what crawls out from underneath.